Welcome to Wild Coast FM 96. This is Nelia Lowe, and it's not Education on Air, but it's a very special program. Do you know the word Hellenique? Does it sound Greek to you? Well, it is. In our studio, we have a very special guest. She's visiting in Hermanus, Hellenique Ajaru. Welcome, Hellenique.
Thank you so much, Nelia. Lovely to be here.
I'm so pleased we discovered you, because what you're going to tell us, I don't think we've ever talked about that on Wild Coast FM. And first of all, just tell our listeners shortly how your life path went, because you're actually a South African. At the moment, you live in Cyprus. We hope one day you'll come back. But so you're actually a South African. How did your life path go to take you eventually to Cyprus?
Yes, I'm actually born in Zimbabwe from Greek Cypriot parents. They left and arrived in Zimbabwe, then moved to South Africa quite young in their lives. And I grew up in Johannesburg near Roodepoort area, then decided I wanted to study in Cape Town, studied psychology at UCT, and then my honours and masters in clinical psychology at Stellenbosch University in Afrikaans. So, goeiemôre en baie dankie vir die experience. For me, it was a very interesting journey living in South Africa. I learned so much about diversity, respecting people, the complexity of living in a country like this, and had great value from growing up in the communities that I was exposed to, but always had this double-sided experience of life, being in the culture of the Cypriots, but then living in a diverse country like South Africa. So I've always visited Cyprus, but I had a strong calling when I was finishing my psychology to find ways to work with different kinds of people and different ways of working that would be universal. So in my psychology, it just didn't feel enough to work only with clinical psychological methods. And I was always a creative person, so I found it quite intriguing to find new ways to do things as a psychologist. And then being exposed to Cyprus growing up, I decided at some point that it was going to be a good experience for me to be in the middle of Europe, able to travel easily, to learn more about my country, my ancestors. It was quite a nice way to be influenced.
Other route.
Exactly, yeah. And I think for me, the choice to go was very specific and quite profound, in that I was loving being in Cape Town, but I felt that I had reached some kind of ceiling with my work here. As a drummer at the time and a psychologist, I was doing a lot of work already there in the community using drumming as a tool.
Okay, before you continue with that, I think our listeners are now sitting up straight when they hear the word drumming. So you're a clinical psychologist. Thank you for the background you've given us going back to Cyprus. We understand that. And then you specialized in drumming. Was it because you were a drummer?
Well, I was a clinical psychologist finishing my training. I started practicing as a traditional therapist, normally in Goodwood, actually, a place called Libertas Clinic, working bilingually in Afrikaans and English. And I found a moment where I realized that it really wasn't enough to be a psychologist offering just psychological techniques for the people I was meeting. It seemed to me like there was something needed to provide an experience that was a little bit more positive, because psychotherapy and clinical psychology can be a little bit hard work for a lot of people, and it takes time. And I felt I wanted to inspire people. And at the time, I had to go on my own personal journey. So I stopped working as a psychologist for a year and just tuned into my inner voice, which was quite scary to do, but very powerful, and realized I needed to find what inspired me if I was really going to inspire others. And I knew at the time that drumming was this very interesting thing that crossed my path. I was a dancer most of my life as a child. I did 5 styles of dancing. I was very creative, but I'd chosen a healing clinical human science to study. And I wanted always to find a way to express the creativity. And I knew that drumming was bringing me that. It inspired me. And I thought, well, what about finding out more about why this inspires me? And trying to understand what the psychological process is of rhythm on the brain and on the body and on consciousness. Why is it giving me this inspiration?
So you had to study.
So then I started to do some self-study on it. Yeah.
Was there literature, other
Very
experimentation all over the world around drumming?
In fact, it was very little, and it's still now a fascinating journey to uncover more and more new research that's coming up. There's a lot of very interesting scientific neuropsychological inquiry about the brain and sound now more than there ever has been. And so it's a wonderful time to be waking up to these ancient and universal parts of our human experience, really, because sound is fundamental in all religions. It's really an amazing part of how we work as humans.
Wasn't the drum sort of one of the very first instruments?
Exactly.
It's a really primitive, original.
In fact, the two sticks hitting together is the first instrument ever found.
I see.
And the very first instrument after that is what they call the frame drum, which was around the Middle East very long ago, almost, certainly some people say even 1000 BC. We could track the origin of percussion. So percussion, the whole idea of hitting two objects together and creating a sound that you then repeat into a rhythm, is a very fundamental, what we say primordial, which is a beautiful word, a kind of primal need in us to enact and replicate something that actually we experience in utero with our mothers. We actually grow in the vibration of the mother's body. So the blood rushing all the way down to her feet and then rushing all the way back up to her heart creates something that we talk about as a kind of polarity of energy. So that is a vibration that's going one way and then going the other way, like the heartbeat, like a double heartbeat, like the breath, breathing in, breathing out. So we have this very primordial rhythmic flow, and we grow, our cells grow according to it. So a lot of mystics and a lot of very interesting people who are not in the psychological field or the medical field, but maybe in the more ancient studies have talked about the power of sound. And this was my study, was to find them, because music therapy was not quite interesting on my path for me. It was more the actual natural sound.
I see. And that's what you studied in Spain.
That's right. That took me to Spain,
Yes. That's an interesting story about Alicante, where you were.
Yes.
The dome. Tell us about that dome.
That was a highlight in my journey. I actually met somebody here called Nestor Kornblum. He's I believe, a Lebanese South African who then immigrated to Spain with his wife, Michelle Averard, who was a rock musician of all things. But eventually they came together and decided to learn more of these kinds of parts of sound that they then called sound healing. It was using the natural vibration that we have. So that means from wood, from skins, from metal. The minute you take an instrument and you filter it, you send it through an electronic kind of system, you change the sound vibration. So they would prefer to stay with natural vibrations, which means you're not using electricity and you're not using a machine to kind of work with that sound. So that means they used the human voice, and they created the structure that we find in a lot of ancient churches. In Cyprus, there's many of them, but we don't use them, obviously, in the same way. But it exists as a kind of structure that can then dance or reflect, the sound waves in a different way. So that was then this dome that was built in a forest in the one workshop that I did with them, and then in my 6-month training as a sound therapist with them, we did the training at their actual dome, which was near their house in Alicante. So these two structures served to provide a space where you would work with your voice and you would work with natural sounding instruments, and the sound would be reflecting off the dome, and it would create a much more subtle experience of the way the waves can be, the sound waves can be distorted and manipulated according to the way you curl your lips around your mouth.
That's interesting.
We call this overtone singing. And Nestor Kornblum happens to be one of the people in Europe who has developed many different styles of doing this. A very interesting study in Pythagorean sound healing as well, which is Pythagoras explaining to us that we have octaves in music, and these create harmonics in certain ways of using the mouth. Many tribes have practiced this technique.
Fantastic.
Kind of chanting. Yeah.
But let's listen to Nestor Kornblum with the amazing overtone chant.
Wonderful.
Wellcoast 96 FM, your community radio station.
You're listening to Wellcoast FM. I'm Nelia Lowe. We're talking to Helenique Ajaru. She is a South African Cypriot living in Cyprus at the moment. She's a clinical psychologist, and she specialized in sound therapy, especially drumming, which is very interesting. And we've just listened to Nestor Kornblum, amazing overtone chant, which was really beautiful. She's told us about the Dome in Alicante, where she did a course, and with Nestor Kornblum. You
That's
did it
right,
there.
yes.
Fantastic. Helenique, that sounds so Greek, which it is. How do you practice now? You've combined everything you've learned, and
Yes.
you've studied so many different things around psychology. What are you doing now?
I was drawn to Cyprus to do some peace building work there because I saw Turkish Cypriot young people and Greek Cypriot young people having very different historical backgrounds. So my work there was initiated by this desire to try and create a universal language. Drumming was a tool to do that. So I got some funding over there from what they call the United Nations Development Project. It was a project on helping the community get more involved with peace as a dialogue. And that sort of spurred on a real interest in me to try to find ways, many different ways, to affect the community through sound, through drumming, through yoga-based workshops that were happening in yoga studios. after the peace building project with drumming, I did a specific one called Heartbeat, which was 8 different workshops, which were drumming workshops, free for the community, but sponsored workshops. And that sort of introduced me to the community in Cyprus in many different ways. I had to formalize that more after that. So I started doing specific drum workshops, and then got invited by the Ministry of Education in Cyprus to do this for the schools with permission from them, because you need permission to work with kids at schools in Cyprus. So that's
in South Africa too.
Yes, I think it's become a lot more formalized generally now. So before, when I was in Cape Town, I was also working at schools. So I've been developing over the years this technique of using the drum circle as a place to talk about working together as a group. So now I do some drum therapy projects. For example, with a school in Cyprus now, they've been invited to do a project for 8 weeks with the whole school. It's 110 kids. And the real project intention is to develop self-esteem. These are children that come from quite damaged backgrounds. They have families that are not very sophisticated in their ways of supporting the child's education. So they struggle at school. So the intention is to teach them how to believe more in their own selves, really, but to do that in the context of a drum circle. So it's also helping kids that have some struggles with concentration and developmental delays, to also help us spot those kids and see what we can do to do more. I teach Nadi Yoga workshops, which is using the sound-based meditation techniques in the yogic philosophy. I also am a yoga teacher, so I've chosen to focus more on that part, which we also talk about as Kriya Yoga, which is a way of combining meditation and a specific sound-based exercise where you're actually creating these kinds of harmonics that you heard in the music, away from any kind of doctrine or dogma or belief system. It's really just using the primordial sound in our own body, and noticing how this is affecting different areas of the body, and then helping the brain reach an alpha brainwave state, which is meditation, really.
You spoke about Kundalini and the Kundalini Yoga. In what way could your therapy assist people with Kundalini?
Yes, quite a controversial area to demystify, I think, Kundalini, because we all understand different things according to what we've been exposed to. But Kundalini, as I've now begun to understand it, is actually talking about the fact that we all have a potential energy in us. And the ancient Greeks spoke about it in a very different way. The psychologists speak about it as actualization, reaching your fullest potential. Aristotle talked about it as the entelechy. These are important things for me to know as someone working in a very specific traditional community, because, of course, yoga is something that a lot of people also respect, and a lot of people don't really understand what it is, and maybe don't know if it's useful or really beneficial. For me, it's all very clearly coming down to a very basic reality that we all have parts of us that are ready to develop, and sometimes we have to direct that development. And that means we prepare ourselves, we clean ourselves, we work on ourselves, we improve ourselves, we get into psychotherapy and maybe learn about our struggles. And we need to clear enough of that away and out of us before we can let that potential energy really rise up in the body. And this is what Kundalini has been speaking about. I happen to have a teacher who talks about that as also the moment where the Holy Spirit actually enters your body and really affects your entire system. And obviously saintly beings were ascending masters of a process where they united with this cosmic energy, meaning that they are people that actually cleaned themselves out, purified themselves so much that this potential energy in them reached up into the brain, illuminates the brain, electrifies the nervous system, and actually gets them to a state of consciousness that is very well beyond most of us.
I see.
This is what now has been called Kundalini. So For me, when we're doing any kind of cleansing process or any kind of psychotherapeutic journey, because I work as a very traditional clinical psychologist in my private practice, I don't always use the drumming and I don't always use the sound. I invite people to workshops if they want to do more of this alternative style of work. So the more we're working on ourselves, we are constantly cleaning out all these things in us that are maybe not belonging to the authentic essence, potential part of us that can reach this fullest actualization, like the psychologists say. So this the process is always developing in us. So we can get to a point where we activate or we kind of allow this potential energy to rise up in us. And when that happens, we reach a kind of emotional maturity and a higher state of awareness about how we are connected to all things. We have a kind of reverence, a prayerful way of being in the world. We realize that our thoughts, our feelings, our actions are all either in service of something good and something beyond our own personal gratification and beyond the ego, like we say. So I think I'm trying to answer the question. It feels
I know it's complicated,
large,
but if one goes beyond that level,
yes,
where you sort of can't come back. Does your yoga and other therapy help that person to just sort of reach a level again where they can contribute to the community?
For me, I think there's quite a process there to help people reach a safe and responsible way of using their energy in life. So my specific way of perhaps treating what you're referring to is to actually help that person get more connected to the earth, to get back into simplifying the way that they are going to use their insights in service of others. And I find that that's a very important part of everybody's development nowadays, because we can't be just out for our own personal gain.
We can't live in isolation.
No. And we need to be thinking of our communities and offering what we learn to others again. Yeah.
Won't you give us a demonstration of what you do with that drum?
Sure. Sure. I'm going to play for you a traditional frame drum, which is at the moment one of my favorite tools. And it's actually a Middle Eastern rhythm that I'll start with. And it was taught to me by a very famous Israeli drummer called Zohar Fresco, who has actually great respect for this instrument as a tool that was played by women, actually. It was called Miriam's drum in Israel. In Cyprus, we have one of the most prolific collections of ancient statues that were women holding this drum and playing it back in the days when they were in honor of what they called the great goddess of Cyprus. And so now we have a goddess, Aphrodite, that we dedicate the island to, Island of Love, Island of Aphrodite. So you're welcome to come and visit us whenever you can. I'm going to play a traditional rhythm, and then I'll play you what I call a trance rhythm, which actually gets your brain to synchronize right and left hemispheres. And this is really the main study of my work, and the main contribution is to take the brain into what we call alpha and then theta state, which is a little bit more rare. But first a traditional rhythm, and then I'll show you the trance rhythm. So here we go.
She's just taking off her rings and her glasses.
Yeah. So here we go.
lovely. Wow. That was the traditional rhythm.
At the beginning,
It's a lovely sound. You play it on the side of the drum. It's interesting.
That's right, yes. And when you said, how do I practice now? I actually teach women to play this instrument, as I was taught by a woman who wrote the book When the Drummers Were Women. And we use it as a very interesting tool to get in touch with more subtle feeling and experience in our own body, because you use the fingers, which develops the motor neuron pathways, we call it, the motor skills in the body that are a lot more refined, because the fingers, you have 8 possibilities and you have about 3 positions on the drum. So you have about 8 times 3 is 24 specific places that you can play. So to develop that connection to the brain and, do it all in real second timing, it's quite a strong technical practice, a
So
skill.
it's not that simple.
Right, yeah. And then it has this effect on also calming and soothing the body, and it's quite close to the heart, the place where you hold the drum, so it's moving through the left ear.
Yeah, you're holding
You
it
have a-
against your body, not flat on
That's
in
right,
front of
different
you.
experience.
That's interesting. And I know that drumming is used to relieve stress. Many companies have weekends where they get all their people together
That's
for
right,
drumming.
yeah.
Are you going to play us the one that aligns the left hand and the right hand side?
That was the one I just did
Was
at
that the one
at
you've
the
just
end.
done? Oh, I see. You did 2. That's
Yeah,
right.
the one at the end was, it's actually a Brazilian rhythm, but it's part of what we call a more unique way of counting the music, So we have that kind of continuous, monotonous sound almost. It's sort of this one I did. I mean, if you listen to something like that for about 12 minutes, you really do have a different experience in your brainwave states.
That's interesting. What does
Yeah.
one do with your neighbors if you're a drummer?
You find places to play where there's no one around, or you hope God will put you in some place where no one lives near you, like where I live
Yeah.
now. I don't
Yeah.
have people and neighbors around me. I have a place where I can practice, and then I go to venues, find places to play.
Soundproof.
in nature.
Well, if all the people in Admana start drumming, it's going to be interesting. No, that is really lovely. Thank you. We don't often have live entertainment in the studio. Do you want us to listen now to Zohar Fresco while
I
you've
think
spoken about
yes,
him?
let's listen to him.
What is it that we're listening to, Dane?
Hi, listeners, and Nelia. We are listening to Zohar Fresco and Rick Solo.
You're listening to Well Coast 96 FM, Rhythm of the Overstrand.
And that was Zoa Fresco with the Rick solo. Wasn't it lovely? Listeners, we are fortunate to hear this interesting aspect of psychology, therapy today from Helenique Argiro. She's visiting us. She's a South African who lives in Cyprus, but she was visiting in Hermanus, and we're fortunate that she could be with us today. Helenique, you work with all populations. How do people connect with you online? Will you just tell us?
Sure, yes. Anybody can take advantage of a free half-hour Skype with me, where I can talk to you about some very interesting ways to use sound to deal with special needs, developmental delays, or even just traditional problems that people normally have, standard problems, stress relief, etc., depression, anxiety, using sound. So that's half an hour is a Skype call that you can get on the ahaintelligence.com website. That's my new style of work. AHA Intelligence. AHA, meaning like insight, and these kind of intelligence referring to the higher centers of the brain that we can activate through insight.
AHA Intelligence.
That's
I love
right.
it.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're saying that your therapy, the kind of work you do, it's not just therapy, it's more than that, is also significant for the development for children, for example. In what way?
Absolutely. I believe after all the study and exploration on sound, rhythm, psychology, consciousness, merging ancient wisdom with modern science, so looking at the neuropsychological research that we have, looking at the ancients, what they were saying, it's very clear to me that the brain needs to be developed in a specific way in order for us to have a much more holistic, healthy, harmonious experience on the planet. And in fact, what we see is that education normally is training a lot more of what we call left brain functioning, right hand dominance. So I stay away from teaching people to play too much rhythm with the right hand again, because I believe there's a way through drumming where we can actually reach these what we call synchronized hemispheric states. We're synchronizing the brain's hemisphere. So I'm intending to do some research on this and look at how we can use both hands in brain gym kind of exercises, but also through drumming with younger children as a playful way to develop both the right hemisphere and the left, and to actually balance out the way that these areas of the brain are working. I was fascinated recently by a piece of research that was done that was very clearly saying that musical intelligence is one of the highest forms of mental activity, especially improvisation. After knowing how to play a musical instrument, if we can create something new and improvise in the space of playing the musical instrument, that skill is one of the highest in the world, that we have actually seen the brain activity lights up more areas of the brain than anything else we can do, which actually means that if we develop musical intelligence in children at a young age, and perhaps even use different ways to help the brain develop both the right and the left hemisphere, we can reach more whole brain functioning. It's very fashionable nowadays, and I think there's good reason for that. So the development of a child can accelerate and also become a lot more balanced in the way we solve problems, because right now it's a bit complex to go into, but you can also work with some online courses that I have on the AHA Intelligence website to find out more about this. Till now we tend to miss the real synchronized way of using our body and brain. So if we learn to connect the heart with the head, so we need to, follow some practices that are very helpful in doing that. And if we learn to work with both hemispheres, the development of children and the way those children grow into the world and solve some of these very specifically difficult problems in the world, I think will vastly improve, because we need a lot more creativity to solve world problems.
And leaders who think with both sides of the
Exactly. Leaders who are quite well-rounded and really intelligent in being able to use creative and scientific ways to work with things.
Well, that sounds so interesting. Listeners, we've put the the detail of Helenique's contact numbers and the email, and we'll put the email on as well. Can we put the email
Of
on,
course,
on
yes.
air?
Yes.
And then the website is on our Facebook. So you just go to www.whalecoastfm.co.za. As a last, unfortunately, our time is running out. Helenique, tell us what are some of the highlights of your journey? It's more than a career; it's a journey. What are
Yes.
some highlights? You're still
Yes.
young, but you've lived.
Yes, I've been very grateful to meet an array of amazing teachers in my life. One of my highlights was really when I first learned to play the drum. It was in the Klein Karoo. I went for a camping festival with friends, and I remember picking up a drum very innocently, playing with a friend of mine next to me, didn't know what I was doing. And I just noticed that there was a very beautiful connection between me and him. When we were in harmony, we were having lots of fun. When the sound was lovely, people very far from us started to dance and had a connection with what we were doing. This is where I learned that sound is like a catalyst. It's a transmission between where you are. It communicates over distance. It's a connector, a catalyst for things. That was one highlight. And another one was obviously doing this transition from here to Cyprus, and meeting some people all around the world that are passionate about what I'm passionate about has been one of the most greatest gifts. And also I had the grace to study with some wonderful meditation teachers along my path, and also very recently with someone called Dr. Claudio Naranjo, who's an Enneagram specialist. It's very wonderful to be in his presence. And also studying with a very famous music therapist from South America, who actually also teaches one of the music therapy styles in universities called Dr. Benenson, was quite a beautiful highlight. People who also share this knowledge that I'm sharing today about how there are ways for us to create more harmony in the way that we develop our intelligence as human beings. And whoever and however it was decided that science is separate to art and maths is separate to music, was trying to help us in some way to get more focused in these areas. But really the new movement for us is to begin to create this marriage and the harmony between these things, that actually music is maths and maths is music. Yeah.
And perhaps in the end we'll bring peace in the world.
Yes, yes. Maybe we can
So
do
interesting.
that.
When you were playing the drum, you were saying people started dancing. But immediately when the drum started playing, I know that my grandchildren would have started dancing just like that.
Oh, wonderful.
And even babies, when they hear the rhythm,
Yeah,
they
they're
start
so
moving. It's so
connected.
interesting.
Beautiful.
Just for a minute or so, do you have any plans with South Africa?
So blessed to have amazing friends in this country, so I will always be returning. And my parents still live here, so I always visit. And I do think maybe next year I have some tickling feeling that I would like to organize some new solutions type conference. I don't know if it does happen. I'd like to bring some people that I've met around the world that I think are real innovators, real pioneers, for something new and interesting, entrepreneurs who are really quite innovative, that represent this new intelligence of being able
Fantastic,
to create
sir.
solutions.
I
There you
will
go.
definitely go there and listen. You've got this interesting circle of friends all over the world. Helenique Argiro, thank you for sharing your life path with us and
you
your
so
vision. We appreciate it. We're watching you, and what is nice that if you're online, you can watch people. Dane, thank you for technical support. Listeners, this broadcast will be on our podcast. When? Today still. And so if you go to our website, whalecoastfm.co.za, you will find this podcast, and then people all over the world can listen. Thank you, Helenique, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and good luck to everybody. I wish you the best
Thank
with whatever
you.
you're
This
doing.
is Nelia
Thank
Lau
you.
saying goodbye.
Listeners, that was Mamadi Keita